Any questions?
I've got a question for the mayor. Mayor,
Yes.
you promoted Michael McGrath to public safety director.
Right.
Obviously, a lot of this documented abuse happened under him. Do you regret that decision now, and how do you explain that decision?
I explained it by thinking he was the right person at that time, and I believe he is now, and I do not regret it.
Attorney
General?
Yes.
Can I ask you a question about all of these investigations you're conducting of various police departments around the country? Has any pattern or pathology emerged from these that you think leads cops to cross the line in this day and age?
Well, I certainly wouldn't call it a pathology, but I think we certainly see patterns that have emerged through the investigations that we have done, where you see inadequate training, where you see resource deficiencies, where you see cultural problems that exist within police departments. And so I think the work that we have done is designed to deal with those kinds of issues. But there are certainly themes that you see. I mentioned a number of cities that we are working in, 20 or so where we have filed cases. All of the things that we have found, though, are correctable if there is a determination made by the political leadership, by those who lead the police force, to make those forces better, to make better the relationships between the forces and the communities that they serve. And that is certainly our hope with the effort that we're talking about here today in Cleveland.
Is it a growing problem, or are we just paying more attention to it?
I'm not sure it's a growing problem. I think that part of what we have seen is as a result of the really great work that's been done by our Civil Rights Division, first under Tom Perez, now under Vanita, the work of our United States attorneys around the country. We have placed a greater emphasis on finding these kinds of issues, working with local communities to deal with them. One of the first things I said when I came back to the Justice Department as Attorney General was that the Civil Rights Division was open for business again, and I meant that. We have devoted resources to that division and really placed an emphasis on the work of the Civil Rights Division. So I think it's probably largely a result of the great work of the men and women who have this as their primary responsibility.
Tom?
Mr. Denelbach or Mr. Walder, the recent shooting at 12-year-old Tamir Rice, wondering, was that at all included in your analysis? And if not, how does that illustrate or reflect upon the issues in the report? What are your thoughts about that incident?
Well, so it was not included in our analysis. It's not part of our analysis here today, and our findings are not based upon it. Of course, there's an ongoing investigation into that matter as we speak, so I really don't think it's appropriate for me to comment on my personal views of that matter. Of course, we're monitoring that investigation as well, and we will see what happens. Hold on. Let's go to the back.
What will you be investigating in the Eric Garner case?
Well, I mean, as I indicated yesterday in the statement that I made, we will certainly get access to all of the materials that was done by the DA in Staten Island, but we will do an independent, thorough investigation of our own. And so we will, as we do in all of these matters, try to get as much information as we can from witnesses who were on the scene. Obviously, review the tape. There will be medical evidence, I'm sure, that we will be looking at. But it will be an exhaustive and fair investigation, and we will reach our own independent determinations as to who, if anybody, should be charged.
You and you.
It's hard to predict exactly how long it's going to take, but I think, the people in New York, the people in this nation would be well served by us doing this as quickly as we can, and that's what we have committed to doing.
Yes.
What would you say
Hold on.
to the-
Hold on. Next.
Mr. Holder, do you feel that perhaps with the announcement of these investigations that you might be raising expectations for people, knowing the fact that the bar is pretty high for these civil rights investigations, in the Garner case and others?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to raise expectations unnecessarily, but on the other hand, I do want to assure the people of this country that we take the obligation that we have very seriously, that we investigate thoroughly, and where we can hold people accountable, we will do so. there is, as you say, Evan, a high bar that we have to meet in conducting these civil rights investigations. But our history has shown that we have met that bar in prior investigations. And if that's possible with regard to the ones that we have underway, and if that is appropriate, we'll bring charges.
Right, for here, then here.
Given your findings, and either Mr. Holder or Mayor Jackson can address this, given the findings, should the Cleveland Police Department be reviewing the Tamir Rice shooting, or should you ask an independent entity to take care of that investigation?
Yeah, so there is an ongoing investigation, and I understand that we have findings here today, but I want to separate, the process that I think we should respect. And look, we didn't open this investigation and result to any one case. There have been other significant cases involving use of force that have been in the public eye, and we have let the process of investigation at the local level play out first in those instances, and we're seeing that play out now currently in our community as well. And so I think that it is appropriate to allow the local investigation process to go out with us monitoring it and a commitment to review whatever is done after that and then make a determination, as the Attorney General said was done in other jurisdictions after that, as to what should happen next. So, yes.
This is a question for Mayor Jackson. You have vehemently denied that the November 29th chase and shooting represented a systemic failure in the department. And while I know that that incident was not a part of this examination, the Justice Department is now saying that there are systemic failures on a much broader scale, that the system has failed and is failing. Do you still believe that there is no systemic failure in your police department?
I will say, as it was presented then, it was presented in a way of saying there was a systemic failure, and that systemic failure resulted in the incident. And I was saying then, and I say now, that it implied that meant that there were no rules, that there were no policies in place, and that when you review the evidence, you review the communications, there were officers who did the right thing, there were officers who did the wrong thing. We disciplined those who did the wrong thing. But there was not as if the entire system failed. There were individual decisions made by individual officers that resulted in that incident. And that's what we said then, and that's what we say now.
Do you believe that there are systemic failures?
There are problems in the division of the Cleveland Police. And this review has demonstrated some of those problems. We will enter into discussion with the Department of Justice is how we correct those problems that we agree on that are really problems. And then we'll move ahead in a consent decree and with a monitor to ensure implementation of those necessary changes.
Mr. Mayor?
All right, so let's go 1, 2, 3. So, yes?
If I could just
And then we'll get to you. We're just trying to.
Mr. Holder, could you talk to the people of Cleveland right now and what message you'd like to send to them after they're obviously hearing these terrible violations by the Cleveland Police Department?
Well, I think the reality is that there are problems in the force here that have been identified by the work that has been done by the Civil Rights Division as well as the U.S. Attorney's Office here. But I also think that the people of Cleveland should have a sense of hope that those problems, now having been identified with the commitment of the political leadership, the chief, that these problems can be rectified and that the force can be made better, and that the relationship that it has to exist between those of us in law enforcement and the communities that we serve can be made better. I mean, this is going to take time. These are problems that are long in the making, and it will not be something that a month from now we'll be able to say things have changed in a fundamental way. But I would bet that at the conclusion of the consent decree period that things will have changed in a fundamental way. So I think that people should be concerned, certainly about the past, focus on the present, and I think hopeful about the future.
1, 2, 3.
Attorney General, if it's determined that the Cleveland Police Department should use body cameras on all the officers, cameras on all the police cars, it's very expensive. Will the federal government, will the DOJ contribute or help pay for that cost?
We will do the best that we can. The president, in announcing those measures, I guess earlier in the week, asked Congress to help in this regard. Asked for, I guess, $263 million to buy 50,000 body cameras. And I think that that is something that ought to be seen as a bipartisan measure that this new Congress ought to be able to deal with. You know, if Washington wants to show that it can work, that's something that they need to pass. 50,000 cameras, you know, distributed around this country won't solve everything, and people should not think that, you know, the presence of a camera necessarily will mean that all the problems we are facing are going to go away. But it's an important component of a solution. And I would hope that Congress, early on, when they reconvene and reconstitute themselves, would look at that that funding request and act upon it in a favorable way.
What if Cleveland can't afford it? It's a real problem.
Well, I mean, we'll certainly, you know, listen as part of this process, this ongoing process, to see what the resource needs are, and to the extent that we can be helpful in that regard, we'll do so. I mean, as Steve indicated in his opening remarks, we have been, I think, mindful of the resource needs that the city has had and tried to meet them in a variety of other contexts, and I think we'll continue to do that.
Take two more
Yes.
questions. Chief Williams, questions for Chief Williams. How do you feel hearing these findings? I mean, you're the chief of the police, and how do you take it to your people and implement this? How big of a challenge is it?
Well, of course, it's not easy. If you spend 20-plus years in a profession that you love, it's not easy to hear news like this. But what I want the people of this city to know is that the men and women of the division stand committed to having a better police department. We take on this challenge, and I have complete confidence that we will meet and exceed this challenge in the years to come. So the people of this city just need to know that we will work to make this police department better.
And then, yeah, last question, I think.
You had,
Oh, you want to go ahead? Go ahead.
Well, Mayor, just a question on
right.
systemic breakdown of police seems to be an understatement here when the City Hall and the police department can't even screen police applicants properly, as we've seen in the Tamir elementary, things like that, as we've seen in the Tamir Rice case. Does the buck stop with you, or why does it happen?
Well, I'm the mayor. It always stops with me, always. And so, and I don't shirk that responsibility or accountability. So it always falls with me.
Why
Always.
wasn't he screened?
Well, that is something I've had a conversation about before I came here. And once I'm fully aware of all the circumstances and what happened, then I'll answer that question. But right now, I'm not able to answer that fully.
Right, last question.
Attorney General Holder, Chief Williams, we spent time in Cincinnati after the DOJ had a collaborative there. The mayor of Cincinnati told me that what you have to be careful of in these situations is what he termed unintended consequences, meaning you have to get buy-in from the police. And he said, the police union chief told us the buy-in is the officers are safer after the reform. Is that your experience across the country, that if there is buy-in from the police, the officers and the community are both safe?
Well, I think that the point you make is a really critical one. It's one that I mentioned in my remarks. Everybody wins if these consent decrees are done in an appropriate way. You know, law enforcement does its job better because you have a better relationship with the community that you serve, which means more information comes your way. You're better able to solve problems. And the officers themselves, when viewed more favorably by the community, are in an environment, I think, where they are, in fact, safer. So done well, you can have a police department that's better respected and members of that force who will find their job environment much more safe. That's a very good point.
What's the time frame for getting the consent decree in place?
We will be working as expeditiously as possible to get it in place. Obviously, I think this relates back to the previous question. We are going to be consulting extensively with line officers, with the police unions, with the community, with the business community, faith community, to come together to end up with a consent decree that really does have the buy-in across all of these different communities. The Civil Rights Division and the U.S. Attorney's Office is only going to be as successful as we are going to be in Cleveland if there is all of that buy-in. It requires time. We want to be thoughtful about it, but we also don't want to take too long. So we want to do it expeditiously, and we want to end up with an effective consent decree that will be monitored, where we will have objective metrics to measure progress, to change things around, change parts of the consent decree if we realize that things aren't working the way that we originally intended. But the goal is to be as thoughtful and expeditious and inclusive in getting the buy-in as we produce the consent decree.
All right, thank you.
Okay, appreciate the information.